Half-built nuclear plants sitting wide open, entire cities covered in giant, useless pillars after a failed construction, and billion-dollar projects left half-finished. These are more construction sites that had to be abandoned. This is still one of the biggest construction failures in US history. Back in 1977, workers started building the Marble Hill nuclear power plant in Indiana. The company behind it, Public Service Indiana, hyped it up as the future of clean power. For a few years, construction was non-stop. They were pouring concrete, putting up containment buildings, running cables. Billions of dollars were going into this thing. But by the early 80s, the whole project started collapsing under its own weight. Costs were exploding way beyond what anyone expected. And we're not talking about a few million extra. This thing was about to blow past $7 billion. Regulators kept changing safety requirements after 3 Mile Island happened in 1979. Every new rule meant tearing something out and rebuilding it. Then came 1984. Inspectors found quality control issues in the concrete and wiring, and the company was basically out of cash. There was no way they could finish it, and no investors were willing to throw more money into the project, so construction stopped. Thousands of workers were laid off the same week, and the plant was left sitting half-built, with its cooling towers wide open. For years, the unfinished structures just rusted in place until most of it was torn down. Satsop is another US nuclear project that crashed and burned before it even got close to opening. Construction began in the late 70s when Washington Public Power Supply System decided they were going to build 5 nuclear plants at once. Overconfidence is an understatement. They didn't have the money, the planning, or the long-term demand to justify any of it, but they went ahead anyway. Satsop's 2 reactor towers were rising fast, but every year the budget kept ballooning. By 1983, the entire project blew up financially. They defaulted on $2.25 billion in bonds, which at the time was the biggest municipal bond failure in American history. People literally called the group whoops because of how badly they screwed everything up. Money ran out, construction stopped. One of the cooling towers was already almost finished. 450 feet tall, fully shaped, just missing the mechanical guts inside. The other tower was still just a skeleton. There were also empty control rooms, unfinished tunnels, half-installed cables, and for decades, the place just sat there. Eventually, parts of the site got reused as office space and a training ground for firefighters, but the towers are still empty. This is one most people don't even know existed. In the early 80s, Cuba and the Soviet Union teamed up to build Cuba's first nuclear power plant. Construction started in 1983 at a spot called Juragua. The site was massive, and for a while things actually moved smoothly, but when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Cuba lost its funding, its engineers, its materials, everything. Suddenly they had no money and no technical support. It's not like they could just order replacement parts. Every crucial component came from Soviet factories that weren't running anymore. By 1992, the entire project was halted. Everything was locked up mid-construction. The reactor vessel had been delivered, but never installed. Welders left tools on the floors, pipes were half assembled, and it was for the best. Later, they found out that a lot of the welding and safety work done up to that point wasn't even up to basic standards. If they had finished this plant, there was a real risk it could have turned into another Chernobyl-level disaster. To this day, though, the unfinished buildings and rusting reactor shell are still sitting out in the Cuban jungle. And next up we have what's sometimes referred to as Bangkok's Stonehenge. Back in 1990, Thailand approved a huge construction project to fix Bangkok's insane traffic problem. It was supposed to be an elevated highway and rail system stretching across the city. The company behind it, Hotwell Holdings, started putting up these giant concrete pillars everywhere, meant to support train tracks, roads, and overpasses, but the whole thing was a disaster from the start. They couldn't secure the land they needed. Deadlines were slipping, the designs kept changing, and absolutely nothing was coordinated. But for 7 years, these pillars just kept going up with no real plan. It became pretty obvious the company was not going to hit any of their targets. In 1998, the government finally snapped and just canceled the entire project. Construction stopped immediately. What was left behind looked insane. Hundreds of gigantic concrete pillars, which people started calling Bangkok Stonehenge. If you didn't know any better, you'd think they were leftovers from an ancient society, put up a bunch of mysterious monoliths with no practical purpose. For almost 2 decades, the pillars sat there collecting graffiti. Today, most of the pillars have been removed. The project is still remembered as one of the biggest urban planning failures in the country's history. And this was supposed to be the biggest, flashiest government building on Earth. In the early 1930s, the Soviet Union decided they were going to build the Palace of Soviets, a massive skyscraper topped with a giant statue of Lenin. Construction started in 1937, and they actually demolished the old Cathedral of Christ the Savior to clear the land. They laid the foundation, built the huge steel frame, and everything was moving forward. Then World War II broke out. By 1941, when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, the government didn't just pause the construction, they ripped half of it apart. They needed steel for the war effort, so workers were ordered to dismantle parts of the building frame, melt it down for weapons. Whatever was left standing got damaged by air raids. After the war, the project never resumed. Priorities were just different now, so instead of finishing it, the Soviets turned the giant foundation into a public swimming pool. It became one of the largest outdoor heated pools in the world. Today, the pool is gone, and the original cathedral has actually been rebuilt over the old site. El Helicoide is one of the strangest construction failures ever. Back in the late 50s, developers wanted to build the most futuristic shopping center in South America. The design was pretty crazy. This giant spiraling ramp built into a hillside where customers could drive their cars up the ramps and park right outside the stores. A pretty cool idea. By the early 60s, the shell of the building was already in place, but everything fell apart. Venezuela was going through a massive political unrest after the fall of dictator Marcos Pérez Jiménez. By 1962, work stopped. The structure was there, but work on the interior had barely started. Hundreds of stores that were supposed to open never got walls even, and for decades the building changed hands over and over, but nobody could finish it. Squatters moved in at one point, artists would hold events there, but then came the darkest chapter. Venezuelan government converted the unfinished complex into a prison, one of the worst in the world. It's run by Venezuela's secret police, and people who've been held there say it is brutal. Detainees have reported being beaten, electrocuted, forced into horrible positions, or locked up in tiny cells with barely any air. Some say they were even made to breathe through bags filled with filth. Absolute hell on earth. Detroit has a lot of abandoned buildings, as we know, but this one takes the prize for being abandoned before it was even finished. Construction on a massive new county jail started in 2011. Budget was supposed to be around $300 million. They cleared the land, started building the towers, put in the first levels of concrete flooring. Everything looked like it was on schedule. Then spending reports came out. The project wasn't just over budget, it was really over budget. By 2013, the project cost had blown past $390 million, and the country realized they were about to run completely out of money before the jail was even halfway done. Workers were told to leave the site, and the whole thing became a half-finished concrete skeleton in the middle of downtown. People in Detroit started calling it the fail jail, because the county had managed to build something completely unusable while burning through hundreds of millions of dollars. It sat there for years until the county finally struck a deal to hand the land over to the owner of the Detroit Pistons, and the unfinished jail was demolished. Bulgaria's Belene plant is one of the most notorious start-and-stop construction disasters in Europe. Work began in 1987 with full Soviet backing. The plan was to build two massive reactors on the Danube River. Again, the Soviet Union collapsed mid-construction, and Bulgaria's economy went straight into crisis. By 1990, the government announced that the plant would be halted because of safety concerns and money problems, and the nearly finished structures were left sitting in the open. Unlike the other entries on this list though, this project didn't just die once. It got revived and canceled over and over. In 2006, they restarted construction. In 2012, they canceled it again because costs were skyrocketing to nearly $10 billion. In 2018, they tried reviving it yet again, not completed. This plant has been abandoned so many times that parts of it look like they're from the 80s and others look brand new. It's a nuclear project that's absorbed money for almost 40 years without ever producing a single watt of power. Eightcity was supposed to be South Korea's version of Dubai. Luxury resorts, casinos, and yacht marinas. The project launched in 2006 with a projected cost of $300 billion, which would have made it one of the most expensive construction projects in human history. They picked a massive area and immediately started clearing land, preparing foundations, but it turned into a disaster almost instantly. Investors started backing out by 2008. Then the global financial crisis hit, and the people funding the project basically vanished. Eightcity was still pushing forward on paper, but on the ground, everything had slowed to a crawl. 2013, the entire project was officially halted. Nothing was finished, most of it hadn't got past concept art even. Construction crews were told to stop everything, and what little had been built was left sitting in the middle of empty fields on the coast. Today, the site is just abandoned land with a few leftover foundations. This is one of Africa's largest unfinished construction projects, and it's been stuck in limbo for over 40 years. Construction on the Ajaokuta steel mill started in 1979, when Nigeria partnered with the Soviet Union to build a massive industrial complex that would turn the country into a major steel producer. They pumped billions into clearing land, installing machinery, and building hundreds of support buildings, roads, rail lines, and housing. By the mid-80s, the plant was nearly completed. About 98% of the physical structures were done, but leadership changed, Soviet engineers left, and equipment deliveries stopped. Worst part was the plant was so close to being done. Workers had spent years building a facility meant to change the whole country, and then it was just abandoned. Since then, the Nigerian government has tried over and over to revive it. 1994, 2003, 2008, 2016. None of the restarts have worked. Today, the entire steel complex is just sitting there with thousands of tons of machinery that were installed but never powered on even once. It is one of the most expensive construction failures in Africa's history, and easily one of the biggest abandoned builds in the world. That's been the video for today. I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next one.